most amazing artist. I hope you are having an awesome day today. And today we are going to be practicing using our clay. We're going to be practicing 3 different forms: spheres, coils, and slabs. These are 3 forms that you can pretty much make anything out of. As long as you know how to make a sphere, a coil, and a slab, you can make anything you want out of clay. And clay is awesome if you want to be a 3D artist. That means you make 3-dimensional sculptures that you can see all the way around. And that means we're going to be using the element of art form a lot during this project, because form is when a shape is 3-dimensional. You turn a 2D shape like a circle into a 3D shape, which is a sphere. Okay, so what I have in front of me is I have a piece of canvas, and this is going to help keep my table nice and clean. We're using canvas instead of messy mats because I don't want our clay to get stuck on the paper messy mat. This is a lot better to use when you're using clay. I have this laminated piece of paper in front of me, and I've laminated it because after we use it, it will be easy to wipe off. And I can use it again for another class. And on this piece of paper, we have the 3 different forms, which I've already went over: spheres, coils, and slabs. I'm going to teach you how to do all 3 of those today. To make our slabs, we're going to need something to cut with, and I just have a skewer or something that has a point on the end. This kind of looks like a pencil, but it has no lead in it. You could use a popsicle stick to cut. You could use a plastic knife. If you have an actual ceramic tool to cut your clay with, and you can use that as well. I also have some water over here in case my clay starts to get a little bit dry. And actually mine is cracking. I don't know if you can see that, but when it starts to crack like that, it means that our clay is a little bit dry. And what we can do is just dip our fingers in the clay and squish some water into it, so then it's easier to handle. And clay definitely does get messy, but that's kind of what makes it fun. And it's something that we don't get to use all the time in the art room. We usually only use it once a year. So we really want to take care of it and try our best while we are able to work with it. So I just added a little bit more water in there. And what I'm doing is I'm just squishing it with one hand and then throwing it to the other to kind of warm it up a little bit, because it's a little bit hard right now. And when your clay is hard like this, it's very hard to work with. So if we squish it, or this is also called wedging it, it helps to, 1, get the air bubbles out. If you squish it down, it helps get any air bubbles out. That's called wedging it, or squishing it like this. And as you can see, that just got messy, but since I laminated this paper, it's very easy to wipe away. So the first thing I'm gonna do after I've wedged or squished my clay a little bit is I'm just gonna take a little bit of it off, set the rest of it off to the side, and I'm going to start with my 3 spheres. So since there's 3 circles here, I know I need to make 1, 2, 3 spheres. And what I'm going to do is, I don't actually really need this much, I don't think, is with my clay here, I am going to take the palms of my hands and I'm going to start rolling it around to form a ball, or a 3D circle, which is called a sphere. And I'm just gonna roll it around, and it might be a little tricky at first if you've never done this before, but as you keep on making these, they will get better and better and better. That's one way to make a sphere. You could also take it and roll it around on your table kind of the same way, but our goal here is to make sure that none of the sides are flat. So if you have a flat side, then we need to round that out a little bit to try to make a sphere. And of course, we're humans, it's not going to be perfect, but we just want to make sure that all sides are rounded. And there's my first sphere. So I'm going to do another one, and I need to do 2 more actually. So I'm going to grab some more clay. And remember, if your clay starts to get a little bit dry, this is a very small amount of clay, so I only need a small amount of water in there, and I'll kind of just work that in. So then my clay is easier to work with. And I will do the same exact thing that I did for my first sphere to this ball of clay. And I'm gonna put it in the palm of my hand. I'll take my other palm, kind of cup it over the clay and start to roll it around in my hand. This is just the way that I prefer to do it. Like I said, if you'd rather do it on the table, you can definitely do that as well. And there's my second sphere. So I'm gonna go ahead and do my 3rd sphere, and then I'll be right back to show you how to do the coils. All right, I have my 3 spheres here, and now I am ready to make a coil. We have 2 coils that we're going to make. We have one that's just a straight line, and then we have a coil that we will turn into a spiral line. And to do that is I'm just gonna grab a little bit more clay. We really don't need a lot for a coil. Like I said at the beginning of this video, if your clay is dry, it's going to be very difficult to do these 3 forms. So make sure you're adding enough water to your clay. But don't add too much water, because then you're going to have something called slip, which is clay and water mixed together. And we're gonna actually be using that for our project later on. Once we get started on it, you're going to learn all about slip, but we are not trying to make slip today. So just add a little bit of water at a time until your clay is a lot easier to work with. So remember, the first step to making a coil is to first make a sphere, and then it's actually kind of hard to make a coil on this laminated piece. So what I'm going to do is I'll just bring that off to the side. It's going to be a lot easier on this piece of canvas here. And I'm just taking my sphere that I had, I'm rolling it out with my hands. Once it gets long enough, you can start using both of your hands. And what I'm doing is I'm starting towards the center of my coil, and as I roll, my hands are pulling the clay out, which makes it a little bit longer every time you do it. And sometimes coils like to be fat in some places and skinny in other places. If you have a very skinny area, then you'll want to jump over to a thicker area of your coil, because if it gets too thin, then it's probably going to break actually. So try not to make it too thin, really make it even. So in these wider areas, I'm only focusing my attention there. In these skinny areas, I'm trying to not pull out. But as you can see, the more I've done this, the longer my coil has gotten. And I think that is about the size that I need. It's actually a little bit too big, so I can take my popsicle stick and just cut it off right there. And there is my first coil. And I am going to make another coil for this spiral line here. So I'm just going to take some clay, and as I learned making this coil, it's a lot easier to make straight on the canvas. It's a little bit tricky to do on that laminated piece of paper. So this is a little bit dry, so I'm just going to add some water a little bit at a time until it's easier to work with. So once your clay is easy to work with, it's not dry anymore. If it's dry, I mean, yours might not even be dry at all and you don't need to add water. It really depends on your clay and how dry it is. But mine's a little bit dry today, so I'm gonna need to add some water to each of my pieces, but maybe you don't have to. Remember, with a coil, we start with a sphere, and I'm gonna start rolling that sphere out on my table, and it makes a little cylinder. So now I can start using both of my hands, and I always start in the center, and I bring it out a little bit. Any fat areas we'll want to concentrate on more, because we don't want any wide areas and then skinny areas. We want our coils to be about the same thickness all the way across. So to get it longer, I'm starting in the center, and as I roll, my hands are slightly, ever so gently pulling out towards the edges to make it a little bit longer. And there is one coil, and I'm gonna bring over my sheet again, and I'm gonna try to see if it will wrap around. And I think it will. It doesn't have to go all the way towards the edge, but that is pretty good. So there is another coil. You can do straight coils, you could do spiral coils. Coils are very important to know when you're working with clay. So if it's not working out the first time, you're gonna have to practice it a few times to get it right. So now I have my spheres, I have my 2 coils, now I need to make a slab. And again, I'm just gonna move this over off to the side, and I'll just use the rest of this clay. And as we know, Miss M's clay is pretty dry, so I'm gonna add some water to it and work it in. Alright, and to make a slab, I forgot to tell you at the beginning, you're also going to need something to roll your slab out with. If you don't have anything like this, like a rolling pin or a cylinder of wood, then you actually don't really need it. You can just use your hands to flatten out your slab. However, this is going to make it a lot easier and help the top of our slab be a lot flatter. Okay, so I've added a little bit of water to this, and it's a lot easier to work with. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to use my palm, and I set it down on my table. I'm going to use this part of my hand right here, and I'm going to start pressing it out, because we want it to be a little bit flat before we start rolling it. Once it's a little bit flattened out, we can take our rolling pin, and I'm not pressing very hard, and I'm just going to roll it out to the thickness that I want. When you're working with clay, you don't want it to be too thick because then it might burst in the kiln, and you don't want it to be too thin either because then it will be more likely to fall apart. So we want a good middle area, and for me that is about 1/2 inch or a little bit less thick, and that is a pretty good thickness. You don't want it to be super thick like this, and you don't want it to be any thinner than this. Any thinner than this, it will definitely break. And for my piece of paper here, my assignment, it wants me to make a square. So from this slab, I am going to take my popsicle stick, because that's what I have available, and I am going to cut out a square. So I'm going to cut any of those rounded pieces off. And as we know, a square has 4 equal sides, so I'm going to try to make it as equal as I can. And once you have that, you've cut off all your edges, you're going to carefully pick up your slab. And if you want to make the corners nice and smooth, we're going to have to know how to do that for our project, because if I was to fire this in the kiln, those very sharp edges might actually cut me when I try to take it out, because clay gets very hard in the kiln. So we want to smooth those edges out, and I'm just taking my finger and I'm running it across those very sharp edges. So let me put my slab off to the side, bring over my practice paper here, put my 2 other spheres down, and my slab will go right there. And look, I got it almost perfectly to fit right in this area. So those are the 3 different forms that you need to know before starting any clay project. Once you've mastered making spheres and coils and slabs, you can make anything you want to out of clay. I hope you guys had a lot of fun learning about clay today, learning these 3 different forms and getting to feel the clay with your hands and play around with it a little bit, so then you are ready to start your project next time. I can't wait to see how you guys do with your practice today. I know you're going to do amazing because you are amazing. All right, I'll see you guys next time. Bye guys.